All right, folks, you are in for a treat today. Today we have Charlie Cook with us. Charlie Cook is widely regarded as one of the nation's leading authorities on U.S. elections and political trends. Charlie founded the independent, nonpartisan Cook Political Report in 1984, serving as editor and publisher until just this August when Amy Walter took over those roles. Charlie remains as a contributor to the renamed Charlie Political Report with Amy Walter. Got it. Second time. All right. In addition to lecturing, Charlie continues to write his weekly column for National Journal and serves as a political analyst for both National Journal and for NBC News. Charlie is also a co-author of the 2020 and 22 editions of the Almanac of American Politics. We're going to be doing Q&A at the end of this session. You can feel free to throw that on the side. There's a Q&A feature, so go ahead and throw your questions in there. With that, I'll kick it over to you, Charlie.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It was only about a half dozen years or so ago that Alex and Jonathan came by, and I met with them, and I didn't know them or anything, and this new idea that they had, and I was a little skeptical. And then as I listened to them, it was like, wow, these guys have cracked the code of how to really use technology to track what's going on in legislative and in terms of what members are saying, what they're doing. That a lot of people had tried it over the years, but it wasn't until they came along with quorum that they got it done. I think every election I've ever seen, I've heard somebody, whether it was a journalist or a politician, say, "Oh, this is the most important election, in American history," or something, and which is obviously a ridiculous thing to say each time. But I think you can make a real case that this is a extraordinarily important election for three reasons. And the first one's kind of obvious, but I have to kind of do it anyway, and that is, this country, and you've heard it over and over again, it is evenly and sharply divided, but it's pretty darn close to even. And I think the best way to, the best way to look at it is think of the presidential. In 2016, there were 5 states that with a margin of 1.5 or less, 5 states. Donald Trump won 4 out of 5. In 2020, 5 states were 1.5 or less, and Joe Biden wins 4 out of the 5. And then you think of the Senate. I mean, this is only the second time since we started the direct election of senators in 1914 that a new Congress has begun with the Senate split 50-50. And, John Ossoff's 55,000 vote win over David Perdue, but for that, or if you want to say flip 28,000 votes, and Mitch McConnell would be the majority leader right now. So we're talking about the population of like Fredericksburg, Virginia, or Oxford, Mississippi, as making the difference between majority and minority. And what about the House? Only twice in the last 100 years has the House been this close. And they were like 1930 and 1942. And it was basically 32,000 votes scattered across 5 congressional districts that made the difference between Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy. When you look at the country, people think a third. That's not really it. But if you look at a poll, it'll say 40% independent, basically 30 Republican, 30 independent. But if you ask those independents, what do you lean one way or the other? 3/4 of them do, and that's how they vote. And really, the reality is the country is basically 45% Republican, 45% Democrat, and 10% real legitimate independents. And what's happening, and we'll get into 2022 in just a second, but what's happening is that the country has gotten very close with almost all the people on each side, the 90% that are partisans, are voting straight party tickets. You remember seeing in 2016, every single US Senate race went exactly the same way that state was going in the presidential. Last year, it was everyone but one, Susan Collins in Maine. And right now, 96% of House members are in districts that their presidential candidate carried. Now, and what this has done, because there's basically each side holding firm and not, losing serve, if you will, that it's created high floors and low ceilings nationally and in competitive states and districts, so that the kind of landslides that we used to see can't happen. You know, Franklin Roosevelt in 1932 winning by 18 points and carrying 42 states, or Lyndon Johnson in 64 winning by 23 points in 44 states, or Nixon over McGovern in 72, 23 points, 49 states, or Reagan over Carter by 10 points in 45 states. You can't have those right now because the floor for the trailing party is too high and the ceiling for the leading party too low. And here's a spoiler alert: because you can't have landslides anymore, you're not going to have mandates. Anyway, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. The second is just the volatility. And when you think about it, going into 1992, the Republicans had won 4 out of the 5 most recent presidential elections. 4 out of 5. The only one they lost during that time was 1976 with Jimmy Carter beating President Ford, and I think probably the Watergate and the pardon had something to do with that. And going into the very next 2 years later, into the next midterm election, Democrats had the House, had won majorities in the House for 20 consecutive elections. They'd won majorities in the Senate for 17 out of 20. And so what happened was the Republicans basically had all but ownership of the White House. Democrats all had all but ownership on Capitol Hill. And so what you had was this partisan equilibrium. And you had sort of it's as if voters were creating their own form of separation of powers. All that changed 30 years ago with that 91, 92, 93, 94 period. And that's when things exploded. And since then, we've had 4 consecutive presidents who have lost both House and Senate majorities while they were in office. 4. That's never happened before. So the volatility, explosiveness is the second factor. And the third is the stakes and consequences. You know, I mean, the Republican Party was a center-right party. The Democratic Party was a center-left party. There were plenty of liberal Republicans, you know, when I moved to town, Jacob Javits and Chuck Percy and Ed Brooke, people like that. And there were conservative Democrats like Eastland and Stennis and Sparkman and people like that, you know, and they were, so that the conservative Democrats, liberal Republicans, and plenty of moderates on both sides were like the ballast that kept the two parties from going off into a ditch. But that started changing. And if you think about it one by one, think about Congress, one by one, every liberal Republican, every conservative Democrat, they died, they retired, they lost re-election, or they switched parties. And so that there's no overlap whatsoever. And that same basically thing happened with the electorate, where the parties became ideologically sorted out, with conservatives leaving the Democratic Party and liberals leaving the Republican Party, so that the gap between the two sides. Now, what's the other thing, and you've had some cultural changes, and you know, Newt Gingrich, and I think frankly Pat Buchanan and Sarah Palin affected the culture, changed the culture within the Republican Party before Donald Trump came along. Just as Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren has sharpened the lines over, and I think moved the needle over on the Democratic side. But it's changed the behavior of these elected officials in both parties, so that now no win is too small to claim a mandate. And that's kind of where we are, is like Democrats are acting like they had just, you know, won a mandate, like, you know, they did with FDR in 32 or Lyndon Johnson in 64, when that just sort of didn't happen. Okay, you guys know the midterm history. The party in the White House has lost seats in 36 out of 39 midterm elections since the Civil War. And the exceptions were all very exceptional circumstances. But the Senate, the pattern isn't nearly as good, because out of the 26 midterm elections since we started the direct election of senators in 1914, 19 out of 26. You saw the Senate, you know, that 73%. The party in the White House lost Senate seats. And you just have to kind of always remember that a third of the Senate's up every 2 years, and it matters which third, because they're all not equal. They're all not the same. And in the House and Senate, it's always good with the House. Think of what happened 2 years ago. In the Senate, what happened 6 years ago, because if a party has a really good year one time, then when those seats come back up, they generally are overexposed. Now, why do midterm elections behave this way? And I think it's different reasons for different, I mean, we say shorthand, it's a referendum on the party in the White House, and that's true. But being real specific, for that 10% in the middle, the true independents, I think it's buyer's remorse. It's disappointment. It's that they have high expectations for whoever it was that they elected. And over the next year, 2 years, it just starts cooling down. And for the party of the white presidency, generally it's satisfaction, complacency, or it could be disappointment, but milder emotions. And then this is the most important, with the opposition party, it's revenge, it's anger, it's wanted to avenge what happened in the last election. And that's why the out party is almost always more motivated, more likely to turn out at a higher rate than the people in the other party, in the governing party. And the thing is, it's important with the midterm elections to remember that it's not a popularity contest between two parties, because it's more of a referendum. And if a party has the presidency, the House, the Senate, they month by month, they start assuming total ownership of all problems, whether they created them or not, and whether they've done, whether they've done a good job, or they basically are going to get ownership and will get blamed if they get worse. And although voters are not nearly as good about giving credit when you do, but the presidents do get, pre-existing problems gradually become theirs, and by this point, generally they are. So those are kind of the dynamics that I think drive for the most part. Now, going in, last thing before we get into handicapping, is when a party has the presidency, the House, and the Senate, I think 3 questions to ask. Is the new president, the White House team, and their allies on Capitol Hill, are they seen, and this is key mostly are they seen as getting the job done? Or are they having problems getting it done? Are they, or ineffective, or even incompetent? And so this is separate from ideology or policy. It's are the trains running on time? Are they able to move things through or not? So that's the first question: is getting it done or not getting it done? The second has to do with, the governing party, are they seen as striking a balance and reasonable, or are they seen as going too far, overreaching? And for a Republican, are they overreaching to the right? And for a Democrat, is it overreaching to the left? And the thing is, nobody thinks that their party, or few people think that their party go too far. And few people think the other party isn't going too far. But we're really talking about those independents in the middle. Are they nervous that a governing party is going too far? And the third is just sort of very general. How's the country doing? Is everything working out okay or not? And if people aren't happy about anything, it's generally not going to help whatever the party power. Now, obviously, going through those, applying it for where President Biden and Democrats are right now, on the effectiveness, the first problem that showed up was the immigration and the Mexican border thing, where it looked real bad real early. The second was the pullout of Afghanistan, and less the decision, should we or shouldn't have, or even the timing of it, but just the visual and the execution of it. That was a disaster. And when you started seeing the president's numbers, they were coming down already before Kabul fell. But the thing is, the rate got a lot higher in August, right as all that was happening, and just sort of misreading the situation and thinking, well, we've got months or maybe even a year, and it turned out to be hours or days. And that the visuals, looking at it on television, you could argue that it made the fall of Saigon look orderly. And then the coronavirus, and I don't know that there's anything that President Biden could have done differently or anything like that, but the thing is, and yes, we have these splits on mandates, but if things are getting a lot better, then he'll get some credit. And if things are getting worse, he's going to get some blame, whether he did anything wrong or not. And then finally, on this point, is legislatively, the Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany back in the late 1800s, said that laws are like sausages. It's better not to see them made. Well, think about what voters are seeing this year. And it's like Americans have been given an excruciatingly long and grisly tour of a sausage factory and are expected to try them and buy the sausages at the end of this grisly tour. And this has not been a pretty sight. And if somebody wanted to say it looks dysfunctional, it would be kind of hard to argue with it, with the fighting back and forth between all these factions within Democrats, the two sides. And then, so striking a balance, reasonable. And this is where Democrats are acting like they have a mandate when they just barely won that election. And if you think about it, Democrats have 50 seats in the Senate. You know how many FDR had when he started the New Deal, when he took off? 59 seats in the Senate. Lyndon Johnson, when he started the Great Society, had 68 seats in the Senate, 18 more than Democrats have. What about the House? FDR had 91 more Democrats in the House and 9 more senators than Democrats have right now. So the thing is, it's sort of going, again, I said that no win is too small to claim a mandate. But the thing is, if you don't have the juice behind you, it's kind of hard to make it work. And then, keep one other thing on this point in mind is back during the Reagan presidency, someone coined the phrase that personnel is policy. And we all know that 99% of the decisions in the executive branch are not made in the Oval Office or behind the Resolute desk or even in the White House, but down in the bureaucracy. And is there, do you start seeing that overreach down there in the regulatory side? And that's sort of where we're, what we're kind of focusing on. And then broadly, the economy's starting to slow down a little bit. And, one of my sons texted me last night and asked, is President Biden to blame for the supply chain problems? And no, he's not. But the thing about it is, if things are going well, the president gets credit. If things aren't, they're going to get some blame. So whether it's fair or not, but the bottom line is his approval ratings right now are lower than every other elected president in the history of polling except Donald Trump. I mean, lower than Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, Carter, Reagan, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and Obama at this point. Now that is a really good barometer. So, okay, let's get down to it. 2022. The Senate, if I worked for the DSCC, I would probably be saying, Republicans have a lot more exposure than Democrats do because there are 20 Republican seats up and only 14 Democratic seats up, which is true. And that there are 5 Republican open seats and 0 on the Democratic side. And it's always, usually it's harder to defend an open seat than one that's got an incumbent. That's absolutely true. But if you narrow it down to what states are by their nature are competitive, basically you've got 4 Democratic states and 3 Republican states. So this is pretty close and actually a tiny bit, a little bit more exposure. But, we're going to be watching on the Republican side, the top ones are going to be the open seats in Pennsylvania and North Carolina where Toomey and Burr are retiring. And these primaries are having to shake out. And then Wisconsin, we're still waiting to see whether Ron Johnson's going to run or not. And, there are circumstances where Missouri or Ohio, some of these others might come into play, but those are not top tier races right now. On the Democratic side, the 4 are basically the 2 new guys, that Arizona, Mark Kelly and Raphael Warnock in Georgia. And then you've got Maggie Hassan in New Hampshire and Catherine Cortez Masto in Nevada, which is a very, very close state. So those are the 7 core states. But at this point, it's way too early to start, putting a thumb on the scale. I mean, if right now the conventional wisdom in the House is, there's a really, really big chance that Republicans get a majority in the House. In the Senate, I think it's really too close, too early to really make even an educated guess. On the House, you all know, between reapportionment, the allocation of numbers of seats among the states, that may actually cost Democrats 2 or 3 seats. And then with redistricting, maybe another 3 or 4. So that 5-seat advantage for Democrats in the House, it's sort of not really there. Now, what are the key states to watch? Republicans have a chance to pick up maybe 2 or 3 seats in Florida, maybe 1 or 2 in Texas. This is what David Wasserman, our House guy, said. Georgia 1, Tennessee 1. The best opportunities for Democrats, New York State. If Democrats really push it, they could pick up 3 or 4 seats just in New York State, maybe 1 or 2 in Illinois, and maybe 1 each in Maryland and New Mexico. And it just depends on, which side is more audacious than the other. But this business, some people think that only Republicans gerrymander. Baloney. That's, both sides do it. Now, this is shaping up to be, at least certainly in the House, a textbook midterm election. And we got 13 months to go. But if God told me that Democrats were going to hold on to the House and the Senate, and I had to suggest now why that might have happened, I would, first of all, I think I'd say that Republicans can't win the House, but Democrats can lose it, and look like it's heading much more in that direction. But in terms of the House and Senate overall, if Democrats hold on, I don't think it's going to be because President Biden suddenly becomes a lot more popular or the Democratic agenda becomes a lot more popular. I don't think that's going to happen. If this is saved for Democrats, I think it's going to be because, or I'd say, let me put it differently, there's only one person I think that could save the Democratic majorities, and that's Donald Trump. And not just him as an issue, I think that's sort of secondary, but to the extent that he injects himself and affects who wins primaries in competitive states and districts. Whatever happens in a heavily Republican state or district matters not. It's what happens, at least in terms of the balance of power. It's in competitive. And if you remember, after Barack Obama was elected in 2008 and the Tea Party movement started rising, and you remember in 2010, Republicans nominated Sharon Angle in Nevada and Christine O'Donnell in Delaware. And they were, basically seats that they should have won, punted away. And then 2 years later, same thing happened in Indiana and Missouri with Richard Murdoch and Todd Akin. These were seats that Republicans should have won. So that if they're seizing defeat from the jaws of victory by nominating people that aren't electable in key districts, that I think is the thing that Democrats have to worry about much more than anything else. I've gone on, way longer than I should, but let me, I tell you what, I'll just kind of save 2 minutes. If Patrick will save me 2 minutes at the end for kind of a close, kind of bring it all together. But this is, I think elections, but I didn't make the final point. Because the parties are so different now, the difference between the policy outcome of an all Democratic election versus an all Republican election, vastly more than they used to be. And now, because there's no overlap, the ability to compromise, to reach a consensus on almost anything is almost gone. And so we have these sort of wild gyrations and wild swings, and that the floors and ceilings, it's gonna be really, really competitive. And as we learned in the last month before the 2020 election, volatility, where after that first debate, it certainly looked and appeared, and frankly, just about every Republican strategist I know thought there was a blue wave. They saw a blue wave. But in that last month, I think you had a slice of those independents in the middle start thinking, what's this, wait, Biden's going to win, and it looks like Democrats are going to pay big gains in the Senate, big gains in the House, and blue wave and all this. And what's this business about democratic socialism and Medicare for all and defunding the police? And I think you had a decent sized slice of those independents that just got cold feet. And they decided, more of them decided to go ahead and give Joe Biden the keys to the car, but not give him a credit card to full tank of gas. So I think that's how the volatility just in the last month shifted there. So, I think just sort of buckle yourself in. We've got a ride coming up. Patrick?
All right, thank you so much, Charlie. We have a lot of great questions in the chat. If you have a question, go ahead and throw it in the chat, and we'll see if we can get to that. We have a great question from Sylvia here, which is, does Trump saying the GOP won't turn out because of the big lie have any impact?
I don't think, I mean, a little, but not a whole lot. I mean, I think his people, they're mad now. I mean, the Trump base is just mad as hell. And just, I think they're gonna vote. I mean, the thing is, right now, what we're seeing is we are seeing more enthusiasm among Republicans than we are among Democrats. And so I mean, it's a legitimate question to ask, and it's something to look for. But I think there are a lot of things going, a lot of moving parts in this election, and that's one. But I don't think it's a dominant one that's out there. But sure, it is amazing that despite the fact that a majority of federal judges are Republicans, and all the judges, including Trump-appointed judges, that looked at these cases, and if you go back and look at the 4 years that Trump was in office, the 8 years that George W. Bush was in office, and you look at the number of indictments and convictions for voter fraud, infinitesimal. I mean, this country is facing a lot of really big problems, and voter fraud's not one. Now, confidence in the system and respect for institutions, oh yeah, that's big. But there's not enough voter fraud in this country to lose a minute's sleep over. To be honest, it's just delusional, I think.
For sure. Another question is, what did the recall elections in California tell you about the electorate?
Zero. Yeah, I mean, first of all, California, it's 3 points more Democratic than it was when Gray Davis was recalled. And the last time prior to Gray Davis, the last time a recall in any of a statewide elected official anywhere in the United States was, I think it was 1921 in North Dakota, when a governor, an attorney general, and an agriculture commissioner were all three recalled. And a little factoid that North Dakota is the only state in the union that owns a bank. And it was when the Bank of North Dakota was created, there was a backlash and all of that. But the thing is, recalls, it didn't tell us anything. Virginia, and that's where I skipped over, should address. I think Virginia is going to be, that's what you got to watch, because McAuliffe had been, a successful governor. The state did well. The state's trending Democratic. A Democrat ought to be winning there by 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points. And to the extent that it doesn't hit there. I mean, if McAuliffe wins by 4 or 5 points or more, then I think Democrats ought to say, well, okay, that's fine. And if it was just like 1, 2, maybe 3, I'd be a little nervous. And if they lose, boy, I would go into full-scale panic, because this is a state that is heading towards Democrats. And, it's not, they don't have a flawed Democratic nominee. You can't blame that. He's got plenty of money and a good campaign. I think Democrats should be very, very nervous, but that's the one to watch. I wouldn't pay much attention to California, to be honest.
What about the Georgia runoffs? Like in after Obama was elected, Scott Brown was elected in a rather blue state. And so, does the Georgia runoffs or whatever happened in New Mexico tell you anything about the election?
No, I don't. I mean, the thing is that, well, first of all, had President Trump not said things he said and behaved the way he said prior, after November 3rd and before January 5th, January 6th, looking back at both at the margins there, I think it's probably pretty safe to say that Republicans would have held on to both of them in retrospect. But no, I don't know. I think it's sort of it's the bookend mark, the end of the stack for 2020, not really the beginning of 2021.
Interesting. We have a great question here from Jenna, which is, do you think the low approval rates of both Trump and Biden early in their presidencies is reflective of growing political polarization?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's where the floors and ceilings that, when you go back and look in 40, 50 years ago, presidents would have pretty good job approval ratings among members of the other party initially. And it would take some time for it to sour. And now it's just from the get-go. I mean, there is disapproval before they've gotten in the car at the inauguration. Forget it by the end of the parade. So absolutely. So we've got floors and ceilings that are there, and that it used to be if people felt good about the economy, a president's job approval rating would go up or bad. Now that relationship, starting with Obama and then with Trump, and it looks like so far with Biden, that relationship just isn't there. And by the way, I highly recommend a book called Identity Crisis about after the 2016 election. That's really, really, really good. Lynn Vavreck, Michael Tesler, and gosh, I'm blanking out on the other guy. But anyway, they've got another book coming out soon that sounds like it's going to be really, really good to kind of follow up and develop the thesis that people are voting culture and identity. They're not voting their pocketbooks or the economy the way they used to.
Charlie, can you repeat the name of that book again?
It's Identity Crisis.
Identity Crisis.
Yeah, and I tell you, if you just do Lynn Vavreck, Vavreck. It's an excellent book, and despite the fact that it was written by 3 political scientists, it's in English. I mean, you're not going to get chapped lips or be running for a dictionary. It's just it's very, very, very insightful. I think the most insightful of all the books that came out after 2016, but it's spanning, things that happened before and what happened in 2016.
Cool, folks, we'll throw that in the Engage tab at the top. There's a book recommendations thing, and we'll throw it in there so you can refer back to that. We have a question here from Julie, which is, can you discuss what to do about election integrity and all the doubts that Trump and his, I'll say friends, are creating on election integrity?
Let the record show that quorum did not refer to them as sick. It was the question, or the questioner referred to as sick. Yeah, I just pulled up the thing. During the entire 4 years of the Trump administration, the fact is that these stats, nobody knows them, that in the 4 years of the Trump administration, they got a grand total of 184 convictions in the whole country. And during the Bush administration, George W. Bush, at the very outset, John Ashcroft, the Attorney General, challenged the 93 U.S. attorneys, Bush-appointed U.S. attorneys, they had a ballot access and voter integrity initiative, a 5-year effort. And out of 300 investigations, they only charged 119 people, and they only got 86 convictions. I mean, that's like barely more than 10 a year for 8 years. I mean, this is, I think it has to do with where people are getting their information, and that they're more likely to believe conspiracy theories than anything else. But what about the 9 federal judges that Trump appointed that heard cases involving the 2020 election? And a majority of the federal district court judges in the country are Republican appointees. I mean, the thing is, if this were a big problem, we would see signs of it. But instead, and quite frankly, I think we now have a culture, and whether it's politics or athletics, where there are 2 outcomes to any contest. I win or I've been cheated. That's it. Losing isn't a possibility. And that, I frankly think it comes from every kid getting a trophy. Every kid gets a ribbon, that people, they don't learn how to lose anymore, or the partisan apartheid we have, where so many Americans who they marry, live, work, socialize with, people just like them who vote exactly the way, so they can't fathom that anybody else could possibly win an election because they don't know anybody that voted the other way. Anyway, it's, we've got massive problems in this country. This is not one of them. But the lack of confidence in the system is a crisis. But to be honest, there's not anything there, to be honest.
As a Browns fan, I can say I have been cheated. That has to be the case. We have a great question. I ask you to put your philosopher hat on, which is, with all of this context and history, do you think our democracy is healthy?
I asked if I could have a couple minutes at the end to sum up, but this questioner let me get there earlier. Award-winning, amazing historian Joseph Ellis wrote a piece in the LA Times that Patrick, I'm sure, will find 6, 8, 10 months ago. And it says the enduring question is stunningly simple. Is national government us or them? And what Ellis argues is that these are fights that we've had since the earliest days of the country. And on the central government is us. That was George Washington, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, John Marshall. But then there was the government, central government is them. And we need to worry about them. And that was Thomas Jefferson, Samuel Adams, Patrick Henry, and George Mason. And so these conflicts have been going on for a long time. And there's a but coming here in a minute. And there's a friend of mine is a state senator in Fairfax County, Virginia, Dave Marsden. And he has this theory that you think of the last line of the Pledge of Allegiance, with liberty and justice for all. And we all believe in liberty and justice. But the thing is, you think of the conservatives and Republicans, they place a greater emphasis on liberty, on freedom, self-reliance, meritocracy. Go as far as your talents and work ethic and ingenuity can go. While every liberal Democrat, they put more emphasis on the justice, the fairness, equality, level the playing field, social safety net, the common good. And so, unfortunately, each side puts more emphasis on the other. But and the country's always been like this, but the internet changed things. And I'm not talking specifically left or right, but if you have a nut job here, and you have a nut job 10 miles away over here, and another one, 30 miles or 50, they probably never met. And they certainly couldn't act together. But with the internet, people are able to organize, and people that really are fairly extreme on either direction. And in politics, in a democracy, intensity can beat just raw numbers. And I mean, look at all those years where more people favored gun control than opposed it. But who kept winning time and time and time again on Capitol Hill? It was where the intensity was what mattered. And the Second Amendment folks, they were the ones that had the intensity. So I do worry. I mean, to me, and I hope this doesn't come across badly, but to me, the thing that distinguishes a Western democracy or a real democracy from a banana republic is basically respect for the rule of law and peaceful transition of power. Those are the two things. And we've never really had to worry about that until lately. And it is, it's not so much, and it's where people would, there are people that would rather believe a conspiracy theorist than an expert. And this is not just one party, by the way. I mean, I can remember there were a lot of Democrats that were they were convinced that John Kerry won Ohio, your home state, in 2004. Stacey Abrams in Georgia. It was close. It was really, really close. but it wasn't stolen. She just lost a really close race. But this is where Democrats were acting the same way that Trump, well, not the same way, but same general direction, is where can't accept the fact that there were more people that voted that day or vote than the other. And this is so I do worry about it. I am concerned, to be honest.
Going off that, we have a great question here from Kwame, which is, do you think the GOP House, I should say, will certify the 2024 presidential election if Trump or the GOP nominee loses the electoral college vote?
Wow. I was sitting in a Republican member's office a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Donald Trump owns this conference. Talk about the House Republican Conference, and that there are just very, very, very few members that would be willing to say or do anything that would rile up Donald Trump. And while Donald Trump may or may not have the juice then that he had last year or does right now, who knows? But we're seeing some elected officials and secretaries of state, legislator. We're seeing elected officials around the country that are saying things and behaving in a way that I have to believe they know better, but that's what their base wants. That's what their base is asking for, and so I really. Prior to the last couple of years, I would have thought that was a really stupid question. And now it's not such a stupid question. It's just sort of look at what's happened in Georgia to Republican elected officials in Georgia, who more or less, to a certain extent, tried to play it straight, and they had the wrath of God the wrath of Trump come down. And he's going to make it a mission to beat anybody to purify the Republican House and Senate of anybody that has taken him on. So, sadly, most elected officials know that the last edition of Profiles in Courage has already gone to the printer. It is not being rewritten. And this is something to kind of worry about. And to be honest, I have a lot of very, very close Republican friends who they worry about this. I mean, this is not being partisan at all.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate audience Q&A. I don't know if that's a question that I would have had the courage to ask if it wasn't for folks asking it in the Q&A. I kind of want to switch over to a newish topic. So here's a question from Stephanie, which is there any significant younger generations turnout that can impact the outcome? Are they expected to show up in the midterms?
Well, this is a really good question too. We saw in 2018 the highest midterm election turnout since, I think it was 1914. And then in 2020, we had the highest presidential turnout since 1900. And you had two groups of people that turned out in really big numbers: Trump lovers and Trump loathers. And that sort of describes 90% of the electorate. And it included a whole lot of young people. And, so you had more young people voting in 2018 and 20 than ever before. And the question is, do they start making it a habit? And do they see it as something, a real responsibility? But I mean, the thing is, I don't want to act like I'm trashing young people, because the thing is, young people, 1972 was the first time I was able to vote. It was the year I turned 18, and guys were getting drafted and sent to Vietnam, and guess what? Young people still didn't vote, and the young people under 30, had never voted in big numbers. They've always voted in smaller numbers. But the thing about it is, as people get older, they start voting, becoming higher propensity voters. As they get into the 30s, as they get over 35, they start that sort of thing. But where you had a lot under 30 that did vote in 2018 and 20. So hopefully this is one habit that they will not break, that they will keep going. And when I get pessimistic about the system, you know, I think the best thing I can do is look for, you know, that next generation, because mine sure screwed it up.
So what do you think about that in the chat? Do you think the generation screwed up? All right, speaking of changing demographics and that, will Texas finally become a purple state despite redistricting?
I believe that Texas will be purple. The question is how purple in 2000. You know, there's a saying among economists: if you're going to predict a number, never give a date. And you know, I think we've got to. It is getting, you know, and part of it, you know, yes, part of it is rising minority, but a lot of minority population. Part of it is the proportion that small town rural, which is very heavily Republican, is shrinking. And then you've got lots of people coming in from other parts of the country, you know, coming in from California, you know, places that are bringing with them very different voting habits. So it is getting less red. Now, what's the progression? And we saw the same thing in Virginia as Virginia started turning more and more purple. But these things are rarely straight lines, and they can be some zigzagging. And that's what Democrats ought to worry about. Virginia zigzagging this year. But and here's a provocative question, you know, kind of throw out based on this question is, if midterm elections are a referendum on the party in power, could there be a scenario in one state, let's say, where it's a referendum on the party in power in Washington or the party in power in Austin, keeping in mind that the governor, the legislature, all that stuff, you know, now I would not make that argument, frankly, in any other state. But in Texas, I think it's at least plausible that what the governor and the legislature, their agenda, you know, not saying good or bad, but has been very aggressive, and that if any state was going to stand out and where a party that doesn't have the president, the White House, the House, U.S. House, and the U.S. Senate, I would look at Texas first. And they think they're their own country anyway. So it wouldn't be that out of character.
To close us out, I have a few rapid fire questions.
Sure. That means he wants me to answer them quickly.
So do you think of polls differently after the 2020 election?
I think that we've long known that there were some challenges in the polling profession. But I think that, and I think that's right. But I think one of the problems, well, first of all, I think they're two different things. And one is, you know, you have these people called undecideds. I know that's supposed to be a rapid fire. Occasionally, undecideds decide, you know, and if they just pick up and all move the same direction, well, guess what? We've seen that before. We saw that in 1980. But the second thing is, I think there's a growing body of evidence that there's a pool of people who are mistrustful of institutions. They don't trust politics, and they are just not likely to respond to a poll. And they're not all conservative. They're not all Republican. They're not all Trump people, but they are disproportionately all three. And not Democrat, liberal, you know, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. They're disproportionately more that way, and that they did not get interviewed. And so pollsters are playing with some things to, like, how do you make sure you're getting enough of those folks without putting a finger on the scale inappropriately.
Really. The next question is, do you expect Joe Biden to run for re-election?
How about this? If you had somebody who was about to turn, who was 81 years, let's take Joe Biden out of the equation. You've got an incumbent president that's 81 years old, not even knowing who it is, not even caring who it is. The odds are higher that they wouldn't run than they would. I mean, now, I personally think that President Biden and Donald Trump too have basically told their people, assume that I'm running unless and until I tell you otherwise. I want to keep my options open. In the case of you don't want to be a lame duck any longer than you have to, and there's no need to. So, but if I had to bet, I'd bet he doesn't, but I wouldn't bet a whole lot of money. But that job, man, it ages people, and you saw it age Barack Obama, you saw it age Bill Clinton, you saw it age George Bush. That's a tough job at any age, and so without I don't believe in any of these conspiracy theories about the president. And I don't think he has dementia or senile or anything. I mean, I think that's all nutty stuff. But that job does age people, and that's a hard job. And I can't imagine doing it, at the age of 78.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing it at 26. Do you expect, the last question here today, do you expect Democrats to lose their majority status in 2022?
I think if somebody said that Democrats had a 1 in 3 chance of holding the House, that would be very generous to Democrats. Mm. And that's where I get into, it would mean that a bunch of, my wife doesn't like me calling people wacko, so we'll go with exotic people won primaries in key states and districts. The Senate, I wouldn't stick my neck out, but the Senate, with people voting, Americans are voting more parliamentary. They're voting red, they're voting blue. And if you got a president, whoever the heck it is, with subpar job approval ratings, and right now, you'd have to say that about President Biden, that it's more likely than not that, I wouldn't bet on the Senate, on Democrats holding on, or Democrats losing the Senate, but I sure wouldn't bet against it. That's for sure. And it's too soon to say the Senate. But candidates and campaigns matter less. They still matter, but they matter less than they used to. And we've got a level of partisanship in this country where, let's say I'm a Democrat, where in a lot of race for a lot of people are Democrats. A Democratic candidate could not suck enough that I wouldn't vote for him, or a Republican couldn't be great enough that I wouldn't. And the same thing among Republicans. If I'm a Republican couldn't suck enough that I wouldn't vote for him, or a Democrat could be. I mean, there ought to, and with it that way, it's really hard for any candidate to build their own brand that is distinct from the party. And if the party's going down, the party's not doing well, you can still survive. That's getting harder and harder and harder.
Well, thank you so much, Charlie. This has been just a blast. It's been the highlight of my week so far.
Well, it's always an honor to be associated with anything that Quorum does. So take care. Awesome. Give my best to Jonathan and Alex. Bye.
Will do. Thank you, Charlie. Bye.